Warm welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michaela Skodova, and I'm the CAN EU CAPIT Communications Manager. I will be hosting and facilitating the webinar today. I hope everyone can hear me okay. If you can't, please send me a message via the right-hand panel using the chat window on your right-hand side. We have muted you on entry, so you won't actually be able to talk using your microphone. You do have a chance to ask us questions, which will be answered in the end of the webinar. And again, use the chat panel on your right-hand side. Interact with us using that. To test the chat connection, do let me know if you can hear me, if the sound is okay, and simply even tell us where you're joining us from today. I have with me here today Bart Soldaat, a Groupe de Bruges secretary, who is also the leader coordinator in the Netherlands. His topic for today is Towards a Rural Renaissance. Leader is leading the way. We will also be recording this event, so everyone who missed it can listen to it later, and we'll post the recording on YouTube as well. Before we start, a few words about the CAN EU CAPIT project. The platform is co-financed by European Commission, and the platform and its features are to provide learning tools about the reformed CAP and to offer a place for discussion. I'm excited to announce that we have an e-learning course on the Common Agricultural Policy done by professionals and experts on the topic, which is for anyone who wants to learn about the reformed Common Agricultural Policy. It's for professionals as well as for students who need a comprehensive and accessible overview of the 2014-2020 CAP reform. It's offered free on our platform, and I encourage you to explore this after the webinar. This session is gonna last approximately 30 minutes. We will have the presentation first, and then we will answer your questions. So let's get to our topic. I'm delighted to welcome Bart Soldaat, who will be starting his presentation now. Bart, to you.
Yes, thank you, Michaela. I hope everybody can hear me and can also see the screen with my presentation. If not, you can write in the message box to the right-hand side. Yes, I'm Bart Soldaat. I'm based in Wageningen, the Netherlands. And besides being secretary of the Groupe de Bruges, I'm also been involved in the LEADER program since 2003 as coordinator of various LEADER areas. In my presentation, I hope to show you that LEADER is quite an exceptional part of the European rural development policy, and one of the few that really brings Europe at the doorstep of its citizens. Having some trouble moving there. I'm not, oh, sorry, yeah, here it's going. Yes, in my presentation, I will go briefly back to the origins and history of the LEADER program. I will highlight some general elements of its approach before turning to the current situation and finally conclude with some personal observations. But first, let me reveal what LEADER stands for. Surprisingly, it's something French, Liaisons, Entre, de Développement de l'Économique rurale, and loosely translated it means linking actions aimed at the development of the local economy. LEADER and the LEADER methodology, which I will explain later, originate from successful experiences with participatory rural and regional development projects in developing countries. Some, let's say, enlightened European bureaucrats, one of our current members, Heino van Meyer being one of them, took this methodology on board to try to address emerging problems in marginalizing and depopulating parts of rural areas in an expanding European Union. Starting as an experimental pilot initiative in the beginning of the 1990s, LEADER soon gained momentum and a growing popularity on the LEADER 2 and in particular on the LEADER Plus. The success of LEADER was reflected in the fact that it was included as Access 4 in the 2007-2013 Rural Development Program, what has been called the mainstreaming of LEADER. Member states had to dedicate at least 5% of the European budget available for their rural development program to LEADER. This expansion and, let's say, maturation of LEADER is also reflected in the number of LEADER areas or LAGs, the area covered by LEADER program, and the budget involved. Please note that in this table the budget is in millions of euros and only includes the European money from the European Fund for Agriculture and Rural Development, or EFARD, and also concerns the 15 so-called old member states to make a comparison between the different periods possible. Member states have the obligation to co-finance this budget, so in reality the available budget for LEADER was double the European amount. Those of you who are quick in doing the maths will see that the average amount of European funds available per LEADER area is, however, rather limited, some 2 to 4 million euro for the whole duration of the programming period. What makes LEADER so special, at least in my opinion, that it's not so much about the money as it is about the methodology. Key to this methodology is the bottom-up approach, meaning that local rural stakeholders together design and implement the measures that best suit local requirements through a so-called local development strategy. The LEADER approach is furthermore multi-sectorial or integrated, multi-actor, focusing on cross-sector, cross-actor and cross-border cooperation and networking. Finally, LEADER is also designed to facilitate new experimental approaches to address local issues, which could, if and when successful, be either scaled up or act as a best practice for other areas. In this sense, LEADER areas are also called open laboratories. The legal basis of the local LEADER program is the local development strategy. As mentioned previously, this strategy is being jointly developed by all relevant local stakeholders. In the local development strategy, the rural area should be delineated and described. A LEADER area should have no less than 10,000 and no more than 150,000 inhabitants. There are some exceptions to this rule. A low minimum number for very sparsely populated areas, like in the north of Scandinavia, and a higher maximum of up to 350,000 inhabitants for rural areas near urban centers. The area should also have a certain coherence in terms of local identity or a shared set of challenges to be addressed through the LEADER program. Based on an analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, a limited number of strategic priorities have to be selected from a long list of 8. The local development strategy should also describe the composition and working method of the local action group, the ways in which inhabitants of the area will be informed and involved in the program, the way in which bottom-up projects are being selected, assessed and evaluated by the LAG, and finally also contain a financial chapter of inspected investments through projects and the ways in which these projects will be financed, both through public and private funding. Regarding the public funding, a minimum of 20% of national public co-funding is mandatory, meaning that the public financial contribution from EFARD, the European part of the budget, will be 80% or less, with a minimum of 50%, and that the other 20 to 50% will come from public bodies from the member state, either through national, regional, or local authorities. The Local Action Group, or LAG, is the body responsible for the implementation of the local development strategy. The European Commission sets very few rules for the way the LAG should be composed. The main rule is that representatives of public bodies should always be less than 50%, and that the private parties should reflect the existing diversity of relevant stakeholders in the area. There are also some more technical requirements concerning avoidance of conflict of interest and description of the profile of members and the description of the working methodology. But other than that, it's up to the area itself to define both the legal structure of the LAG and the way the LAG members are either selected or elected. Sorry. In theory, LEADER is playing an even more prominent role in the new 2014-2020 programming period. In this period, the Rural Development Programme is now part of a so-called Common Strategic Framework that sets out common provisions for a number of structural funds. Besides EFARD, these concern the Cohesion Fund, the Fund for Regional Development, the European Social Fund, and the Maritime and Fishery Fund. LEADER appears in this Common Strategic Framework in Chapter 2, Articles 32 to 35, under the new heading of Community-Led Local Development, or CLLD, meaning that the LEADER approach can now also be used in all of these funds and programs. The next step in the mainstreaming of LEADER. How this will work out in practice still remains to be seen. Signs so far seem to indicate reluctance by national and regional authorities to implement the LEADER approach for these other funds on a large scale. So let's for now focus on the way LEADER is being included in the new rural development programs. 180 in total that the member states or regions within member states have submitted to the Commission. Up to this point, a large portion of these rural development programs still have to be approved by the Commission. So I will focus on the ones that have been approved so far. As was the case under the previous program, also for the 2014-2020 period, member states have to dedicate a minimum of 5% of their EFARD budget to LEADER. As you can see in the figure, that in a majority of cases, the member states or regions within member states choose to dedicate only 5 to 7% of the EFARD budget to LEADER, so very close to the minimum. Only in a few cases, a number of German Bundesländer and some regions in Spain, the member states dedicate substantial parts of the budget to LEADER. These regions have understood, based on their own previous experiences and overall evaluations of previous programming periods, that the LEADER approach can be a powerful tool to engage human, social and financial capital at local level, with which real results can be obtained in terms of job creation, new economic activities and new forms of cooperation and networking. Most member states, however, still struggle with the slightly, let's say, anarchistic nature of LEADER and the fact that they do not have the majority in the lag to control public spending, or simply because they still believe more in a sectorial approach, sometimes as a result of a strong farm lobby. The tendency to keep LEADER small is stronger in the new member states who are less familiar with the origins and history of LEADER and also with its successes. And in particular, this is the case in the former communist countries who have a shorter history in developing and implementing policies in a more democratic and participatory way. So what conclusions can we draw from almost 25 years of LEADER, both positive and negative? As I said in the beginning, these conclusions are mainly based on personal observations, but also on independent evaluations of previous LEADER programs. Let's start with the negative points first, so we can end this session on a positive note. The first negative point is, as I have shown before, that most LEADER areas have rather small budgets to work with. Secondly, and very much a cliche, but yes, bureaucracy is a problem. Over the years, the paperwork and controls have increased rather than decreased. And as LEADER usually concerns smaller projects, the bureaucratic overhead is relatively large, which is sometimes a major obstacle for local actors to apply for LEADER funding. This is exacerbated by the fact that there is still little integration of public financial instruments going from European to national to regional and local level. Projects can thus be confronted by a multitude of differing requirements from different authorities when trying to put together the public funding. A further complication is that there is still little cohesion between rural development policy and other policy fields, such as, for example, regional development. As I explained, the Common Strategic Framework for these funds now offers, at least in theory, the opportunity to come to a better policy integration and synergy, but the question remains whether or not member states will put this in practice. Policies are usually spread over different policy departments, and they are traditionally reluctant to work with other departments in the fear of losing part of their policy domain and the attached allocation of funds. Finally, it requires an enormous amount of energy and determination for leader areas to engage themselves in cross-border cooperation with other leader areas in their own country, and let alone with leader areas in other countries. The fact that cross-border cooperation involves dealing with multiple management authorities, all with different requirements and procedures, is a large obstacle to get cooperation projects off the ground. And this is a pity because the 2,000 or so leader areas that we have in Europe often share the same challenges, and cooperation between them can facilitate the creation and dissemination of new and successful practices in an effective way. Now let's turn our attention to the positive sides, because they are there. And most striking on the positive side of the balance is the large multiplier effect. This means that EU spending, although limited, works as a leverage for substantial capital investments from local and regional sources, both public and private. LEADER is also very suitable to engage what is called social capital. This can be in the form of unpaid work done by volunteers or through the input of local skills, knowledge, and networks. The Local Action Group, as a multi-stakeholder public-private platform, ensures that people and organizations push less their own personal or sectorial agenda, but learn, and sometimes they take some time, they learn to come to a common set of goals for the area as a whole and to try to get the best value for money in achieving these common goals. From my personal experience, I can confirm that with LEADER, concrete results are being achieved and that LEADER acts as a lever to stimulate actors from different sectors to work together, often leading to surprising new coalitions, networks, and initiatives. And on this positive note, I conclude my presentation and would like to open the floor to questions, if there are any questions.
Hi, Bart. Thank you for your presentation. That was really interesting. And we get some questions throughout from our listeners. And the first question I would like to ask you is, do you have some striking examples of typical LEADER projects from your personal experience?
Yes, of course. Working for over 10 years in LEADER makes that I have a rich repertoire of projects. I think for me, from my own area, the most striking example is the way LEADER has facilitated the development of a new on-farm economic activity, which is called healthcare farming. This means that farmers, and in particular farmers' wives, are engaged in offering healthcare facilities on the farm for different groups of people that have either physical disabilities or mental disabilities or behavioral problems. And it shows, both from practice and from research, that it's very beneficial for these people. For example, if they have HD or they are recovering from a drug addiction or whatever, that it is very beneficial for them to work on the farm. So that's part of their therapy and part of their rehabilitation program. And with LEADER, we have been able to give this a very big push in my LEADER area, so that now I think more than 100 farms are engaged in a wide range of healthcare services.
That's a great example.
I think that's quite a striking example from my own experience.
Oh, wow. I haven't heard about that example before. That is very interesting. But obviously, the Netherlands are quite the leader when it comes to innovation and in agriculture, and now we even see in the LEADER program. How can authorities be convinced to embrace the LEADER program more, would you say, is another question from one of our participants.
Yes, that's a very difficult question, because from my own experience, there have been some, let's say, in the image, leader has a very strange image in the public eye. There have been some stories going around about leader money going to really strange projects, and this has been in the news and has more or less pushed away all the good examples that are there. So the one or two bad examples of leader money being spent on silly projects has dominated the news, while the majority of other projects that, and this is also confirmed by the evaluations of the rural development programs, yeah, they are not so much in the news. So I think there is a communication problem, first of all, that we are not very successful up to this point to convince policymakers and politicians about the benefits of the leader approach. That's one. On the other hand, and this is what I explained also, maybe more the case in the former communist countries, that it requires quite some, let's say, a grown-up attitude towards democracy to be able to work together with people you usually don't work together with, maybe are even on the opposite side of the debating tables often, let's say farmers against green nature organizations, and now they're at the same table and have to discuss solutions for problems in their area together. So this requires a different attitude and also a kind of training to be able to fulfill the role in a different way. So it takes some time for leader areas to come to that point, so not to push your own agenda, but to come to a really common set of goals for the area. So these are two of the problems for the leader program, for it to be really embraced both by the public authorities but also with the other stakeholders.
Okay, perfect. I think that answers the question. Thank you for that. We have time for one more question, which I would like to read now. If you do have any more questions, please type them out now and send them to me so we can answer them. So the question I would like to ask next is, you mentioned the difficulties in getting cross-border cooperation projects off the ground. What could be done to better facilitate LAGs that want to engage in these kind of cooperation projects?
Yeah, this is also from my personal experience. I've been engaged in a number of cross-border projects, either in the same country or with other countries. Now the situation is that every LAG has its own cooperation budget. This, on the one hand, this is good because then you can decide for yourself how do you want to spend it. On the other hand, you immediately, if you want to do something with it and working together with other local action groups, you are confronted by this bureaucratic setup of management authorities that you have to deal with, and each with their own rules and procedures. So an idea could be, but this is a personal idea, to put the budget for cooperation, to centralize this more. I mean, this is a bit contrary to the leader methodology, but to centralize the cooperation budget and to have one set of rules that apply for all of Europe if local action groups want to engage in cooperation projects. So it's still their money, but it's placed centrally with a common set of rules and procedures, and that would make it much easier to engage and spend less time on, let's say, the bureaucracy and spend more time on the project itself.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. We had a few more questions coming in, which we still have time to answer. So the next question we have is LEADER compatible with LIFE project funding, since both have a kind of social approach?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually, the golden rule in European programs is that you cannot put one fund on top of the other. So you have to choose which European fund you want to use for your specific program or project. So There is an overlap. The same goes with a number of other programs. So what I explained concerning this common strategic framework, in which LIFE program, by the way, is not included, but some other programs like the European Social Fund and the Fund for Regional Development, there is an overlap in approaches and also in objectives. So what could be interesting is to see if the leader methodology, so it's not so much about programs and funding, but the methodology, the bottom-up approach, the participatory approach, if this can also be applied to other programs like the LIFE program. There have been some good results in applying the leader program in the Fisheries Fund, and hopefully there will be new good examples from this multi-fund approach under the heading of community-led local development. And this could be the next step in the further mainstreaming of leader, the leader methodology, also in other programs like LIFE.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I think that answers this question perfectly. There is one more we have time for, and that is kind of in like with the last question we already asked, and you already mentioned a little bit about that. Do you know if there is any link between the leader projects and the new RIS3 smart specialization strategies?
No, there is no link whatsoever. No.
Okay.
Maybe there should be, but there isn't. No.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's a bit of a problem. What I also explained, this lack of integration of policies. When we were writing our new local development strategy for our area, we also been looking in what way does the priorities and the strategy that we have for our area overlap with other programs, both within the Common Agricultural Policy or with other policies. And the only thing that you can do is make this assessment and see if you have a specific project, to try to make the best fit between that project and a European program. So that means that you have to have some kind of help desk, let's say, at local or regional level, that can help you as someone who wants to do a certain project to see, okay, you want to do this, what is the best European program to get funding from?
I think our participants will find this answer also very helpful. Thank you, Bart, for that. I'm afraid we're came to an end of our Q&A part. So this will mark the end of today's webinar. We appreciate everyone who was able to join us today. Thank you so much for joining us. There will be another webinar in the end of the November 26th on the EIP. So if you're interested in that topic, I will be sharing information about that webinar soon on our social media. We would like to thank the rest of partners and supporting organizations for making this webinar possible. If you're interested to find out more about the CAN EU CAPIT project and how can you get involved in our CAP Pro learning course, please visit the www.caneucapit.eu website and you can join in for free. And if you'd like to stay in touch, don't forget to follow us on social media where we are posting regularly. Bart, I would like to thank you today for your time. Thank you for teaching us about the leader approach. I know everybody enjoyed it. I know I did as well. And yeah, and if you can join us again within 1 month for the EIP webinar. And Bart, this is all for today. Thank you so much. Goodbye, Bart.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.